Hello friends, welcome back. We are studying ASP.NET Web API and in that we are studying the basic authentication. In last video, we saw what is basic authentication but theoretically. In this video, we are going to see the practical implementation of basic authentication. If you are not aware of the theoretical part, I'll suggest you to watch that video first. I'll attach the link of that video in the description below. So let us understand the database structure first. I already created one database and as well as a table to store username and password. So this is going to be quite simple. So let us switch to SQL Server. So this is the same database that we used while learning the CRUD operation in Web API. The name is Web API DB and I have added one table, that is my user, and this is very simple structure of user table. We are just storing user ID, username and password. Now this is the data, means I have added two entries as well, means one is admin and one is Scott and their respective password you can see here. Now we'll switch to Visual Studio and we'll start implementing this concept. So here also I am using the same Web API application that we have created last time, and here we are using entity framework to access or to fetch the database details. So what I have to do, I have to update my EDMX file with the new tables that we have added. So let us open the EDMX file. And here you can see two entries are there, but my user table is not present. So first of all, we have to update this. So for that, just right click over here in the empty area and then select update model from database. So then after, since we are going to update the table, so just select this and check this table and hit the finish button. So it may take some time. Yeah, so you can see here my user table is added. This table do not have any relationship with other tables. That's why this relationship arrows are not present. So our entity framework related part is also done. What is the next step? We have to write a method that will validate the username and password. Means whatever username and password entered by the user, we will cross verify it with our database value. If it matches, then we'll consider that user as valid and we'll allow that user to access our Web API. So for that, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add one folder. Let us call it as security. Security. And in this security table, I'm going to add one class which will validate our user with the database values. So let us call it as API security. And in that, I'm going to add one static method. Say static, which will return Boolean type of data and it will validate the user. So that's why I'm naming it as validate, and we are going to pass username and password. So string username and string password. Okay. By default, means I'll return false. Now I'll write a code. Now, first of all, we have to create an object of our DB context class. So the name of DB context class is Web API DB entities. So this is the name of our DB context class. Let us say DB is equal to new Web API entities. Now we will verify the value present in username and password variables or argument with the database value. So for that, I have to fetch the my user table, right? But we are unable to see it, right? So what we have to do? Yeah, This EDMX file is not saved yet. So let me save it. So this will generate that entity, my user entity, and we are able to access it in our .NET application. Yeah, it's done now. Now let us try to access it again. Yeah, now it is accessible. My users dot single or default. Okay. See, generally username and password combination entry should be single in your database. Either it should not present, or if it present, it should be a single entry. That's why I'm using the single or default operator in link. Say u goes to u dot username is equal to whatever the username present in our argument. And similarly, I want to match password also. So u dot password is equal to password. So database variable or database property starts with capital letter, and here all our argument values are in lowercase. Now the singular default will return an object of type my user. So let us collect it. So here I'll say my user. Let us create an object, say user equal to this. Now we know that how singular default work, right? If entry is present in your database, it will return that object. If it do not present, it will give null value. And if more than one matching values are present, in that case it will throw an exception. Okay, so first of all we'll handle null part. So if user value is not null, if user is not equal to null, it means we found that username in the database. In that case I'll return true. Now, as I said, if there are multiple values present in the database, in that case, single or default will throws an exception. So we have to handle it, right? So what will I do? I'll enclose this part in a try catch block. Okay. Yeah. Then catch exception ex. Now here, if there is an exception, right? So in that case also, we didn't get, or user is not validated basically, right? So here I'll return false. So if record is present, then we are returning true. If it is not present, then we are returning false. And if there is an exception, in that case also we are returning the false. Now I made this method static because I don't want to create an object or anything. I directly wanted to access this like API security.validate. But basically, whenever you are implementing it in the real-time application, you will have the user object and everything, and definitely you will implement this in business access layer. Here, our focus is to study basic authentication. So these things are secondary, and I assume that you are aware of all these facts. So let us make this method public also, so I can access it. Yeah, so we are done with this method. Now the actual basic authentication implementation start. Okay, so for that we are going to use the filter concept in Web API. So I already explained what is a filter and what are the filters available in ASP.NET Web API. So if you are not aware of that part, please watch that video, and I'll attach the link of that video also in the description. So now in the same folder, I am going to add one more class, and here we are going to implement our basic authentication filter. So let us call it as basic authentication filter attribute. So this is the convention. You have to postfix it with attribute word because filters are used as a attribute in .NET. So yeah, now the next step is we are going to inherit this class from authorization attribute. Okay, it is already available in ASP.NET Web API, and while studying the concept of filters, I already cover this. Okay, so for that I need to add one namespace. So let us add that namespace first using system.web.http.filters. Okay, so let us inherit our class, say authorization filter attribute. So this filter is already present. If you want to use this filter, you can directly use it, but here we are going to override something in authorization filter. That's why I have inherited it and we have created a new class. Now we are going to override one method here. So the method is on authorization. Okay, so this method we are going to override, and again we are going to call the base method also. But before that, we are going to set some data, we are going to check some values, or we are going to validate our user. So let us complete that part first, and at the end we are going to call a on authorization method of the base class. So first of all, we are going to check what kind of authentication technique is used by the user. We are going to verify that authentication technique, and then after we are going to validate that user. And for that purpose also I need to add some namespaces. So let me add it first. So using system.net, then using system.net.http, then using system.net.http.headers, we will retrieve the authentication technique used by user, and for that we are going to use this action context argument. So you have to say action context dot request dot headers dot authorization. Okay, so this will gives you what kind of authentication has been used or provided by the client. So if you see, this is the return type, means authentication header value is the return type. So we are going to collect this value. So let us declare that authentication header value, say auth value. Okay, so we have collected what kind of authentication user or client had chosen. Now first of all, we'll check whether that value is present or not. Means if no authentication technique is used, in that case authentication value will be null, right? So let us add that checks. So here I'll say auth value not equal to null. Now the second condition is, means whenever user is going to use basic authentication, in that case it will pass the username and password. Okay, and we have to check whether that username and password is provided or not, and for that we have to say I'm going to use the string method is null or white space, and here I'll say auth value dot parameter. Okay, means we are checking whether parameter is available or not. Means if it is null, in that case this is null or white space value return true, and if the value is provided, in that case this method will return the value false. So I'll just check with false, or you can negate this condition. Now one more condition we have to check, that authentication scheme or what kind of authentication user has or client has chosen. So here I'll say auth value dot scheme is equal to basic. Okay, so these are the main outer condition. We have collected the authentication related value, then we check whether authentication value is not null, parameters are provided, and whatever the authentication scheme or technique had chosen, it is basic or not, because we are writing a code for basic authentication. So based on your scheme, this value get changed. Since we are studying basic authentication here, I am comparing it with basic. Now what is the next step? Now we are going to decode our password, because our password is in encrypted form, and for that I need one more namespace. So say using system.text, and again .NET have the method for that. So convert dot from base64 string. Okay, and to that I have to pass this parameter, means whatever username and password you have provided, it will be available in this variable, in this object property. You can say auth value dot parameter. Now this form base64 string will convert your data or convert your string into byte array. Okay, we want to convert it into the normal character or normal string. So for that we are using encoding dot ASCII dot get string. Okay, so this will gives you the output in the string format. Okay, now while learning basic authentication theoretically, I told you that username and password come as a single string and separated by colon. So what we have to do, once you got the string, we have to split it on the colon. So I am going to use split function of string, and I know that separator is colon, so I'll put it here. Okay, now split method returns an array, so I'm going to collect it. String array it returns, so I'm going to collect it. So say string, let us call that array as credentials. Okay, now I got my credentials decoded. Now the next step is we have to check whether they are really credentials or not, whether any value present or not. Means if user has provided the credential, we should get two values, right? So we'll put that check here. So if credentials not equal to null, right? It should not be null, right? Now my array should be of size 2, means I should get two values. So I'll put that condition also. If it is not null, then I'll check the length. Length should be equal to 2. Now the next condition is we have to check whether any value is present in the array position, right? Means if somebody has just put a colon and they do not provided username and password, or some spaces are provided, only spaces are provided, in that case we have to check whether it really has any value or not. So I'll check again. I'm going to use string dot is null or white space method, and to that method I'm going to pass credential of 0, and similarly this should be false, right? And as well as the value at first position, which is nothing but a password, it should not be null, right? Is equal to false. Okay, so basically we are checking credentials are present, length is exactly equal to 2, and then we are checking whether values are present at array 0 position and first position, means both the position. At 0th position there is username, and at first position there is password. Now the next step is to validate our user, and for that we have already wrote this method in API security class. Okay, so let us call that method. It is a static method. So here I'll say if API security dot validate. To that validate method I have to pass username and password. Username present at 0th position, so I'll say credential of 0, and password presents at first position, right? So if this method returns true, my if will evaluate to true. We are going to call this base class method and then say return. Okay, so basically we do not want to execute rest of the part, but whatever condition we have mentioned here, right, means if this fails or if this fails, in that case what we want to do? In that case we want to send a forbidden response to our client, and for that we have to say action context dot response is equal to action context dot request dot create response, and to this response I am going to say forbidden, http status code dot forbidden, and then after we are going to let the user know that our web API is using basic authentication, and for that what we are going to do, in the header of a response we are going to add headers dot add this thing, means we are going to say that this web API is using the basic authentication. So whoever is the client will came to know that this web API is authenticated and basic authentication is used for this web API. So I hope you understood this. We'll just revise it quickly. Okay, so what we did, first of all, we have created a class and we suffixed it with attribute word. My class name is basic authentication filter attribute because I'm going to use it like a attribute. Now the next thing is we are going to inherit from authorization filter attribute, which is already present in ASP.NET Web API, and in that we have overridden on authorization method. So in the first step we have collected the authentication value. Okay, then after we check whether that authentication value is present or not in the request. Then after we check whether the parameter is present or not, and if authentication is present, whether it is basic authentication or not. Now in the next step we converted our parameter, which is nothing but username and password, from base 64 to our normal string, and as well as we splitted it also because username and passwords are separated by colon. And after that we checked whether the credentials are provided or not, and exactly two values are provided or not, and if that values are present we are validating the user, and if user is valid we are calling the on authorization method of our base class and we are returning from it. But if none of the conditions satisfies, in that case we are sending a forbidden response to user, and as well as we are letting know the user that our web API needs a basic authentication. Okay, so in the next video we'll see how to apply this filter and as well as how to test it. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or doubts, you can write it in the comment section.